Have you ever been scrolling through social media and you see all these gorgeous paintings and think, I wish I could do that, but I just don't have the skills? If so, you're not alone. I'm Jessica, and I'm here to tell you that you don't need years of art school to create beautiful art. In this video, we're going to ditch the intimidation and create a stunning, abstract floral landscape using Golden Open Acrylics. And I will list the colors we're using below. And we're also going to be using Golden Fluid Acrylics for certain aspects of the painting. And there's a Liquitex in there as well. We're also going to be using a collection of brushes, and I will also list the size and the types of brushes that I'll be using below, and I'll talk more about why I'm using each size and style of brush in the actual video. You're going to need a paint palette and a rag for wiping off paint, and this is the piece that you're going to be working on today. I've done my best to keep this video real time, so you're seeing my strokes in the same speed that I make them, just like in a real-time class. I'm starting off with a background of the fluorescent pink from Golden, and you'll probably notice a lot of artists who try to capture light in their paintings using fluorescent colors in the underpainting of the piece. And you might wonder why they do that. And the reason that I've found, and a lot of this, and actually all of this, is from my own research and my own trial and error. Everything I have learned, I have taught myself or learned from another creator and taught myself through that other creator. And that's what you're doing here with me. So the fluorescent underpainting, even though a lot of times it gets almost completely covered up, does allow for light to come through the painting. And so even though you might not realize it, even when you're covering up the painting, there's always going to be just a tiny little bit of a fleck of color coming through it, so much as you don't gob on the layers of painting, or I mean the layers of paint. But that's something that you're going to have to practice to learn. The muscle memory of how much paint to put on the canvas is something that comes with consistency, repetition, and practice. You might have noticed that I just poured the paint directly onto the wood panel. And with just having done this so many times in so many different ways, I have come to know just about how much paint I need. And if I have extra, I always have a scrap panel or something next to me. And don't forget about the edges and the back of your piece too, if you end up with extra paint. Now, one of my biggest tips, especially if you are just starting out, is to use reference photos. And this is something that I really had to overcome as a block in myself because I had, for some reason in my life, been told or taught or thought that using reference photos was cheating. And using a reference photo is not cheating. And so find a reference photo and try to make sure that the reference photo is in a similar dimension or a similar crop as the size panel that you're working on. So I'm cropping this to make it a bit more rectangular to match my 4-inch by 12-inch, or I think it's 6-inch by 12-inch panel. And I have this next to me at all times. I'm also not married to my reference, and you don't need to marry your reference or be in a deep, long-term committed relationship with your reference. Your reference is just an outline, it's a guideline, it's just some inspiration to keep you going and to keep you kind of seeing the image instead of in your head, directly in front of you. So I am going in with a mix of the Prussian blue, the phthalo blue, and the Payne's gray for the darkest kind of dark of my sky. And then I am going in also with the titanium white. And I'm using two brushes here. And I also have my towel below that I'm using to wipe my paintbrush. And I do a lot of wiping of the paintbrush in between because I like to have a very specific amount of paint on my brush. And if there's anything I've learned, it is to have multiple brushes and to use a clean brush when you can, especially when switching between colors. Um, if you're going to use white, you should try to use one brush for that white. And if you're going to use dark blue, you should try to use one brush for that dark blue. And I know it can be hard because sometimes you're just painting and you don't want to switch brushes, but I can promise you it is worthwhile having multiple brush options. So here I'm actually going in with a clean dry brush over some of the strokes that I've made in certain areas to blend. But I'm going to go back in. I started to do that and then I realized, no, let me block in first, kind of a night sky. And so I'm going in chunky here and I'm just picking my contrast and my highlight areas. And I'm using my reference photo to help me and guide me onto where the highlights and where the lowlights are in the painting. And I'm reminding myself through this whole process that I am not trying to replicate my reference exactly, that that is just a guide. And that is something you're going to have to repeat to yourself a million times. And you're also going to have to repeat to yourself a million times, this looks like shit. I hate this. This looks bad. I don't like it. And this whole time of everything you're watching, and I'll tell you the points where I start to say to myself, oh, I like this. Oh, okay, this is working. And I am not there yet. The only thing that I'm liking at the time of painting this is the way the slow dry acrylics are blending, because it's like butter and it's amazing how long you can work with them in comparison to a regular acrylic. And I'm not even adding any extra medium here. I'm not using water. I am just using dry brushes and the paint directly from the tube. And a lot of this again comes down to knowing how much paint to put on your brush. And so when you're working, if you're noticing that the colors are not blending well together, it's probably because you're putting too much paint on your brush. A little really does go a long way. So in terms of technique here, I was making sure to have lowlights and highlights and having highlights surrounding the lowlights a bit so that each of the darker areas kind of glow. And I'm taking this mop brush now, and it's just a clean, dry mop brush, and I'm going over ever so delicately, barely, barely, barely putting any pressure. And I am just rubbing in round, steady, even strokes, the paint. And because I put down the right amount, because I didn't put down too much, it's all just softening and gently blending together. Now, this is a technique that took me a long time to become skilled at. I still am not very good at it. I am by no means an expert at this process. This is another self-taught artist teaching you how to teach yourself how to paint. So if it's not working for you right away, the troubleshooting that I can offer is that you might be using too much paint, that your brush itself might not be moppy enough. If it is dirty, like if it has old dried paint on it, or if it isn't fluffy enough, sometimes they're a little coarse and they're a little like wiry. And so if that's the case, you really almost want like a nice powdery blush brush or a makeup brush. Those work really well for this. And so if you're not getting that nice clean blend right away, it's okay. Try less paint, try a better brush, and also just try to keep practicing, and consistency will lead you to the result that you want. I am going in here now with a deep violet, and the deep violet is giving me that purple color that I'm seeing in my reference photo, and I'm building it up. I started with a lighter blue layer with a little bit of that darker blue in there, and now I'm working in a bit of that purple, a bit of that violet, and I'm just slowly building in a ethereal, cloudy like texture into the background. And that really is because I'm working with the slow dry. If you were working with a regular acrylic, it will not work the same way unless you are using a lot of different mediums or using water. And even then, the acrylic paint is going to dry so quickly that you're not going to get this nice, smooth blend. This blend is very similar to oils, and I have only dabbled in oils, but being able to like go back like I am here and pick things out of the paint and rework areas is such a gift when working with acrylic paint. So if you're intimidated to go into these slow dry acrylics, I honestly think that if you start with the slow dry acrylics, you're gonna just be so excited at the progress you're gonna make in being able to paint. And then if you go to work with regular acrylics, you're gonna be like, what? Why would I ever work with these? And so I'm just going in, like I said, and I'm building in contrast over the light. And then if an area becomes too dark, I go back in and I build in a little bit more with a little bit more white. And I'm using just a little bit of paint, and you're going to see through this process of us painting this together today that I am going to make a lot of mistakes. This sky happens to come out pretty good, but I go through a lot of steps that are unnecessary here. And that's the difference between me teaching you and someone who claims to be a pro or an expert. I am still very much in the like beginner intermediate stage of my art journey. And so I'm teaching you the way that I have learned, and it is a trial and error situation, and I make a lot of errors in these videos, and I'm going to make those errors with you and along with you, and then we'll fix them together, and hopefully that will help you learn so that when you make those mistakes, you'll know what you're doing to fix them. I think one of the biggest struggles for me as a self-taught artist, especially at the beginning of my journey, was that I was finding a lot of content that was supposedly for beginners, but it definitely was not for beginners. So my goal here is to really be creating beginner-friendly content. And maybe even if you're not a beginner, you might learn something from these videos. So overall, I'm just really guessing. I am doing my best to create dimension in this. I am using my visual cues from my reference, but I'm not applying any actual technical skill here other than knowing how much paint to put onto my brush intuitively, and only knowing that because I've practiced, and other than knowing that these colors look pretty good together. I've gotten pretty good at knowing my brushes, but I'm still learning. I could probably have used a million different better tools for this piece. But overall, I'm showing you what works. It's what I have, and I think the painting comes out pretty good. And I'll tell you what I do and I don't like about it when I finish. So right now you should just still be layering in the blues and the violet and the white, and not forgetting about your edges. I try to avoid the very top of the panel because it actually leaves that pink to glow when it's on the wall. But I do paint the edges of my piece so that it wraps around the edges. So if you feel like what you've created right now in comparison to what you're seeing in my painting, if you feel like it's muddy and it's not blending well, again, that's another sign that you might be using too much paint. And you can use that to your advantage. You can make your painting chunky, you can make it nice and smooth. It's really up to the intuitive process if you're a self-taught artist, and it's not always guaranteed the outcome that you get is the outcome you were going for. And this is a good time to remind you of the ugly stages and how many of those you're going to go through. You're going to feel like you messed it up and like you're at the point of no return so many times, and just trust yourself and trust that it's very rare that a painting can't be fixed, especially when working with acrylics, because you can always just keep layering over. Like right here, like this part, I remember being like, you're ruining it. You're ruining it. This is bad. This is bad. And honestly, I'm looking at the video from this perspective now, doing the audio, and I'm realizing that no, this was just part of the process. So I'm going to speed it up a little here. So this is 2 times speed, just because I am really doing the same thing here where I am just building the color. And here you actually see me building some of that horizon line. Okay, that's too fast. Let's slow it down a little bit. So I'm building in the horizon line by starting to go a little bit lighter as I get closer to where my actual trees and flowers are going to begin. Here is a lot of guessing for me. It's a lot of me just putting down paint, looking at the colors in my reference, seeing what those colors look like, and then putting the paint on the wood and then blending it in and seeing how it goes. I mean, here I remember I was panicking. because I was getting chunky and I was afraid it wasn't going to keep blending. And I really was just kind of saying, screw it at this point. I do kind of edit out a bit of my hesitations here because this video would have been way too long. But my hesitations and my moments of contemplation would have doubled this video in terms of the times where I felt like I messed up or I did something wrong. And I had to just kind of sit there and stare and try not to throw the painting across the room. Something I notice I do also as a self taught artist, and I don't know if other people do this too, but I stick to colors that I'm familiar with and that I know blend well together because my knowledge of color theory is really poor. So if I know two colors blend well together, I feel a lot safer using it because it's harder to mess up colors that blend well together because I can just kind of keep blending them in. And with these colors, they all blend really well together. And so I don't really have to worry about the points at which I'm like, oh, why did you do that? Why did you do that? Like here, I feel like I'm losing so much of the dimension in the painting and I'm starting to just really overall panic. But then I have to remind myself I'm painting a sky. I'm painting a literal massive expanse in the earth, on above the earth, like around the earth. How do you beyond the earth? Yeah, you know what I mean. But like it doesn't have any actual form. And so it is really just about having fun, exploring, and seeing what happens. And so if you get nothing else out of this video, let it be to just keep practicing and to just keep messing up and keep making mistakes and to know that there's no way that if you just started, if this is your first time trying to paint, it's going to look like what mine looks like. Because even though I'm still in my beginner journey, I'm still learning. And so if you're an experienced painter, especially if you're like an oil painter and you're watching this, you're probably cringing, you know? And so if you're a beginner, you're watching this and you're like, ooh, this is amazing. This is awesome. How does she do that? And if you're seasoned, you're like, this is terrible. Why is she teaching people this way? And I'm not really teaching you anything technical. I'm just teaching you what I do because my process is not intimidating. My process does not require an art degree. My process doesn't even really require much studying in terms of learning how to paint. It really just requires practice and you going and trying this. So at this point, I'm embracing some of the more chunky areas, and I have this really dark point with the Prussian blue and the Payne's gray and the phthalo blue, and I'm going to actually kind of just work around that. And I'm starting to take some of these darker areas and build light around them by going in and blending in white and the lighter blues around the edges of some of the dark points. And I'm actually keeping some of the chunkier aspects of the paint. And I'm doing that here now, even with the white, where I'm adding it on a bit chunky. And then I'm taking a brush and I'm blending out the chunky part just a bit so that it remains a nice high contrast point in the piece, but it also blends in with the paint around me, which is another thing I wouldn't be able to do if I was working with regular acrylics because the acrylic paint would have dried by now and that white wouldn't be blending in so seamlessly like it is. And I do go back in with a bit of that blue mixture around the edges of the white as well to kind of help it blend in. And this is just creating more of that atmospheric texture that you would get if you were looking at a cloudy night sky. And you can have as many areas of contrast as you want. It just depends really on the sky that you're creating. And I'm just kind of winging it here. I'm going to keep repeating that is that I'm really just kind of winging it. And the areas that are coming out good, I'm really surprised about. And I'm loving this right now. I had mentioned I was going to tell you when I love what I'm working on and I forgot, but I have been loving this for a while now. And I'm starting to look at it and understand a bit more about what the painting's trying to tell me. I don't know how else to explain that other than the more you paint and connect with your paintings, you'll know what I mean. But you'll start to get to a point in the painting where you see where it's trying to go and you start to see areas that tell you, okay, let's focus here and let's focus here. Or in the beginning, you're just kind of blocking it out. I did speed this up at this point times two. So this is a two times speed because you kind of get the feel of the general speed of my blending. And we'll go back to the live time, real time, one time speed shortly. But I just want to speed up this process a little bit so that you're not sitting here watching me blend forever. I did, however, at this point start to add in a bit of the fluorescent pink into my white. So I'm taking white and fluorescent pink and I'm mixing that into the blue purple sky that I have going on to start to create a bit of a glow at the horizon. And this is the part where we start to go into our actual garden. So this part is really where I start to guess because I seem to be less confident when I do this style piece on the bottom half for whatever reason that I'm still trying to figure out. The sky seems to be pretty easy for me, and I'm getting it pretty well without having much of a plan aside my reference photo. But the foreground is becoming a little tricky, and so I'm working on trying to feel more confident in my foreground. So I've gone in with some white, and then I've also gone in with some yellow. That is the chartreuse. That's the neon chartreuse color. And so that's helping me get that kind of horizon glow that I'm going for. And I'm doing the same thing that I did up at the top with the high contrast lines and areas. And I am leaving some of the white and the yellow a bit chunky at the horizon line and blending in the rest to kind of go into the blue purple sky. And right away, you can start to see a bit of a cloud like ethereal composition starting to take hold. But I'm really trying to just create this imaginary glow that's going to eventually be covered up by trees and flowers. But I kind of build these paintings layer by layer as though I am actually kind of conducting or constructing, not conducting, constructing the scene in front of me. And so you have your background and your foreground, and this background part is a lot of me just experimenting and figuring out, okay, what colors are going to create the kind of light and what colors are going to blend well to kind of create that soft pinkish purplish glow that we get at dusk. And I'm using all of the knowledge that I have gained from practicing with abstracts and from practicing with other mediums. 95% of my knowledge is simply from practicing and trying and exploring and experimenting almost every single day for the last however many years. And so again, I'm using the mop brush, and I could have cleaned my brushes a lot more during this painting than I did. And I'm learning that it really does come with a consequence when you don't clean your brushes pretty frequently. I'm very lazy. I'm very lazy, and I'd rather just work with a dirty brush and work around it and keep reworking. And someday I'll have a better process with that. But if you are looking to make your process a bit easier on yourself, definitely wash your brushes in clean water as consistently as you can. And with this process, you want your brushes to be as dry as possible. You don't want really any water going into this piece because the water actually, believe it or not, speeds up the drying process of these slow dry acrylics. So I don't recommend adding water unless you want to add the slow dry medium that you can buy from Golden. I really just recommend going straight from the tube with these paints. So I am continuing to kind of build up the background here. And I wish I could explain to you exactly why I'm doing every little thing that I'm doing in the painting, but I just know that at this point, there is a vision in my head of how I'm going to achieve my end result. And that is something that has come to me over, again, years of practicing different mediums and painting. I'm sure that I have some level of inherent talent or ability, but I did not start painting like this until the last 5 to 10 years. And I am still very much in my student era. So I'm teaching you because I feel like I have the skills enough, at least, to make some people feel more confident about their journey. But I am by no means an expert. And so, what I'm doing, especially here at this point, in this painting, I really can't explain it to you from an expert perspective other than it looks pretty, the colors are blending nice, and I am just freaking guessing. I don't know how YouTube feels about the F word. I'll have to figure that out. Remember how I said that there was a lot of points during this painting that could have probably been skipped or were unnecessary? And so just reminding yourself that this is a learning curve for all of us. So I'm going back now. I'm starting to see the light coming out of the sky. There's this little moment that's happening here, and I'm kind of working with that by going in and adding a bit more white, a bit more of that chartreuse, and a bit more of that pink. And I am working around that chunkier area of those lighter colors with the blues and the purples and the pink to just kind of blend it in a relatively seamless way into the sky. And again, this is that benefit of having the slow dry paints, is that I can kind of keep going in and working. And as long as I'm not putting down too much paint, I really end up getting a pretty seamless blend. And so I'm dropping my sky down a bit to start blending it in. So I'm taking that blue and just kind of dragging it down into the pink and the white. And that helps me get that seamless blend. And again, it's just about that ratio of paint. When you get it, and you will notice how nicely things will start to blend. And you can use a clean brush to pick up paint at any time. You can use a napkin or your finger to wipe away if you have too much paint. Like, you're not stuck with what's on there. If you want to wipe it away, you can do that. Just try not to wipe it away after too much drying time, because you will start to get a bit of a gummy consistency when you do that, and you don't want to mess up what you have created. Having a set color palette is really a game changer, and that's something that I am still really working on in my paintings. A lot of times I just kind of grab a canvas and go for it and don't pull out any colors ahead of time, and that's really hindered my process in the past because I get overwhelmed halfway through the painting. I don't really want to think about it, and then eventually I end up with either a muddy mess or with colors that I just don't like what they look like together. So for this painting, using the reference was really helpful because the reference gave me an indication of what colors I needed. If I'm not using a reference and I have to make it up from my brain, I will use a color palette book. There's a few books that I recommend, and I will link those below on my Amazon list. But there are ways that you can kind of come up with palettes from nature. And you can also just go to Pinterest and type in, color palettes for painting, and you'll find a million color palettes. But using a reference is really, really helpful in nailing down the color palette ahead of time so you're not guessing and making mud. So now I'm going in with the sap hue green and a bit of the green gold and some white and my square brush, and I'm starting to create the field of flowers. So this is, again, and I know I'm repetitive here, is a lot of me guessing and just going in and knowing, okay, I need to block in green, so let's block in the green. And then once I've blocked in that green, I can go in and start to block in the flowers. But this is really about building up a darker background, and I put in too much white. I know what I was trying to do here, and I think I could have stopped probably a lot sooner, but I got kind of entranced in blending this field that ends up getting covered anyways and completely changed. But that's okay. And I want to show you this as part of the process rather than editing it out like it never happened, because a lot of times you make unnecessary movements or moves in your painting, or you feel like you messed something up only to find out that it actually just kind of got you to maybe where you were going a little bit in a roundabout way, but you saw a lot of cool scenery and you learned a lot of cool things about the way you weren't going to go. Nothing wrong with a little detour. So this is a lot of detouring, a lot of me just going in and seeing what happens when I add in the white to the green, and I'm starting to deal with a little bit of drying underneath at this point. The green is going to start to dry on me a little bit later in the video, and I work with that in terms of it just kind of creates texture in my flower field. But you do have a working time with these paints, and I'm still trying to figure out exactly what that is. And I can keep you updated on that. Maybe I'll add a little bit of an info blob on the bottom here, blurb blob. But I just start to kind of, I don't know, I'm like making weird perspectives here that don't quite make sense. I'm kind of just testing it out and seeing what happens. And It's okay if you're kind of creating yours with more knowledge of the composition you want to create. I am intuitively guiding myself. And I'm not even really using the reference photo at this point. I don't even know what I was doing. I was just kind of like I said, you just kind of get lost in the paint and you get lost in the process and you forget that like you have an outcome in mind sometimes too, because the paint, especially this paint, the slow dry and the way it blends, you just have a really meditative time going through and watching the colors blend. And that's another big tip that I can just kind of segue into is noticing yourself in this process, noticing your thought process, noticing how am I talking to myself through this? Am I agitating myself? Because trying to paint as someone's berating you in your ear isn't, it's probably not super effective, right? And if you're in your own head berating yourself, how is your painting process going to go? And so trying to be your own best friend while you paint, being kind to yourself while you paint, not over analyzing too much of what you're doing while you paint will make such a huge difference. And definitely don't forget about those edges. That's something that I find that I get annoyed with myself about is that I will forget to do my edges and I tell myself, oh, I'll just wait till it's sold. Once the painting's sold, you really just want to get rid of it and you don't want to spend time going back in and fixing it and doing the edges, especially when you put the paint away and now you're forgetting what colors you used. And, you know, it becomes a little bit of a mess if you don't just do the edges right away or at least block in the edges. Now, this is the part that I was stressing about. And I think that might be why I was taking so long with the blending of the green because I was so stressed about adding this block of trees. I didn't know if I was going to add these trees in my reference photo. I was debating just kind of doing a sky and forgetting about the trees. But I go for it. And I can't figure out yet if I like the chunkier way that I'm going about adding the foreground or if I want to blend it more for my future paintings. And this is something we'll talk about in future paintings as I go. But I feel like it ends up working out, but I think I'm taking the long road again here, where I'm going in with the dark green and I'm trying here to like make a glow effect around the green. So I'm taking some white, I'm taking a little of that chartreuse, I'm taking a little bit of that pink, and I'm going around the green. And then you can see here, I delete that. I say, no way. But I learned something from that moment, but I wiped it away. And then I started, I don't know why I deleted that out of here. I'm not going to try to edit it back in now. But I decide, okay, I know what I'm doing. I think I go in and I start to block in more loosely the tree line that I'm seeing in my reference photo. And I know that in the photo, it's a pretty relatively flat, dark tree line. But if I try to do that in the painting, it's just going to come through as a very flat painting. So I want to create the illusion of some light coming through those trees. So I am adding in a bit of the chartreuse and the white into the dark sap hue green to kind of give the trees some dimension. And I'm also making sure that at the same time, I'm blending in the place where the tree line and the farm field where the flowers are going to go meet. So there's kind of a seamless blend there. I think I probably could have used a smaller brush here. I was struggling with feeling like the tree line was looking kind of blobby and it wasn't really looking like anything was really happening. So I was stressing a bit at this point, trying to figure out, okay, am I ruining this? Am I stuck with a blobby mess? Or is this going to come to life? And luckily, it does slowly start to come to life, but I do emphasize slowly. And it's really just me sitting there with the green and continuing to blend the green into the background a little bit, blending a little bit of the white in. I'm trying to leave some of the background pink glow in the trees, even though in the reference photo, it's not necessarily showing that. If I don't show that in some way in the painting, again, it'll look a bit flat. So I go in and I layer in light into the dark, light into the dark. And the more that you layer light into the dark, the more you're going to get that glowing feeling. And I try to not just use straight white. I try to also use that chartreuse or that pink neon especially, because when you use the neon, it really gives that glow effect that you're looking for. So I'm taking the bottom of my tree line and I am every so often, again, blending it into the field below to kind of give it the illusion that the field is in front of the tree line. And I'm just going to go in and keep adding some light and some dark and some light and some dark. When you're a self-taught artist, it can feel like everything takes a million times longer than it would if maybe you went to art school or maybe if you had more, natural technical ability. But even those people who you see who went to art school or who have natural technical ability, they still practiced and they practiced and they practiced. They did not wake up one day, knowing how to paint, knowing how to draw. They had to spend time honing that in. And maybe they had a natural ability to follow, the guidelines of drawing or painting and did so very quickly and learned very quickly. But there's always some type of process to getting to being as good as one can be in the arts. And so, if what you're painting right now does not look like what I am painting, I want to emphasize again how important it is to not give up and to not assume that you will not get to where I am much quicker than you think if you keep practicing, if you keep working with different mediums, if you keep learning about color, if you keep looking at references in the natural world, looking at an image in front of you if you're out on a sunset and thinking, what color paint would I use if I wanted to paint this? And you might not know the answer right away. I remember my husband who went to art school. I remember he used to ask me that, what colors would you use if you were painting this early in my art journey? And I'd get so frustrated because I had no idea. I couldn't look at a sky. I'd say pink, purple, and blue. But now I can look at a sky and say Payne's gray with a little bit of, purple. And I wanted to say the dioxazine. I think it's dioxazine. I don't know if that's the name. Dioxazine purple and, a bit of light, phthalo green. And I can talk about colors, not even close to in an expert way, but in a way that feels so much more evolved than when I first started painting because I committed to understanding color a little bit more. Like I said, I'm still really early in my journey of understanding color theory. And I'm sure that once I learn color theory, it will blow my mind and change my world. I've dabbled in it a little bit. I understand it at a very, 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 very amateur level. But for the most part, a lot of the color work that you see me work with is just from my own eye and reference and trying to figure it out. So here again, I'm going in now. I have the blocking in of the tree line that I am happy with. I feel like overall it shows a bit of light, it shows some dimension, it's a little chunky, it's a little blended, but it's kind of just abrupt. Like it just happens in the sky. And I want more of that glowy feeling that you're seeing in the reference photo. So I'm taking some white, I'm taking some of the pink, and I'm taking some of the chartreuse, and I am going in and blending in a bit of that into the sky above the tree line to make those trees glow. And this was another thing that I just kind of guessed as I was going. And I am dealing with a drying background, so I don't have a lot of time, but I am able to work with the colors on my palette to kind of create a relatively seamless ethereal blend. This process is so much about trusting yourself and is so much about knowing that you have so much more talent than you likely think you do, and knowing that you are probably your own worst critic. And so, even looking back at this painting now that it's done, I'm like, oh, I would have changed this and I would have done that and I would have done this. But this is only my second painting using these two materials, using the fluid acrylics and the slow dry acrylics together. This is only my second painting like this. And so I'm not saying that to brag. I'm saying because when I went into this, I was like, there's no way. I'm not going to be able to do this. Because I've tried a million times before and I failed. And I've tried a million times before and I failed. And by the second one, I was like, I'm going to make a video of me painting this to talk more about how frustrating it is to be a self-taught artist and feel like you're so far behind everybody else, and reminding you that you're actually not as far behind as you think you are. I'm going to speed us up 2 times again. So this is twice the normal speed, double speed, and I am just working in that tree line into the field. And there's a little bit of a light spot in my reference photo, so I'm using the chartreuse and the white to kind of make that light spot in the field. I may go back in and make a little greenhouse. We'll see. I haven't decided if I'm going to do that yet. There's like a little building in this one, so I've been thinking about it. We'll see. I'll clip it onto the end of the video if I decide to. But yeah, I am a little all over the place sometimes with these, and I'm realizing the sky is drying. So if there's any more details I want to add, I got to do that now. And so I went in with a little chartreuse and a little white to create another area of high contrast in the sky. And then I got this like really awesome accidental lightning bolt. This was not planned. It just kind of happened. It was again me just taking the blobby chartreuse and white and then blending it out while leaving some of the chunkier blobbiness in the middle. And it just created this. The neon paints, I can't emphasize enough how great they are for creating the glow effect in your paintings. So what you're seeing here is me doing a lot of unnecessary, messy painting. I didn't have to do that. I don't know why I did that. I don't know what I was trying to work out with all of that green there, but here we are. A lot of it gets covered up, so it's totally fine. I'm blending in more of the tree line as I'm going here and using some of that darker green. At this point, I'm trying to find a brush that I like to make the lines for the flowers. Looking back at the video now, I'm kind of like, why didn't I like those lines? But for some reason, I didn't like those lines. And at some point, I go back and cover them up and start over again. But I don't have the brush size that I want in terms of making fine lines in my hands. And for some reason, I could have gotten one in the other room, but I didn't get up for this video. So I just kept struggling making lines. And here you see me just pretty much destroy everything I had done previously in that first layer. But at the end of the day, it made some cool texture. And it is what it is. And it didn't ruin the outcome of the painting. But in previous years of me painting, I would have given up at that point and I would have stopped and I wouldn't have finished because I would have told myself I ruined it and I would have been really angry. And I push through and I do that every time now. And that makes all the difference. I find myself thinking so often during a painting, like, wow, I would have thrown this away if this was a few months ago or a few years ago. And let's see if I can make it into something. And then I do. And it's so rewarding. So rewarding to see your own growth as a self taught artist and know I did that. I did that. And so you see me here. I'm just blending this in. I didn't like it. And I decided, all right, I'm just going to go ahead and blend it back in. And this is, again, a big mistake at this point for me because the paint was a little too dry. And so what you're not really seeing is that some of the paint was starting to lift just a little bit. So it's blending okay here, but I definitely could have done without all of this reworking of the bottom layer. And so if you find that you haven't had to do any of this reworking, fantastic, bravo, that's awesome. You might not be as much of an overthinker as me, or you might be working a little bit more efficiently than me, but if you're also just like not having success reworking it, where I'm successfully reworking mine, even though I probably didn't need to keep doing it this many times, you might be doing the same thing and having a much harder time. And I'm going to just repeat again that you got to keep practicing. And this is my millionth time doing this type of painting. Even though it's only my second with these mediums, I've been painting different types of skies and florals and backgrounds and foregrounds in watercolor and acrylic and alcohol ink and all these other mediums for so long that it's made the confidence really, really grow. And so I've come back to this style painting that I would have tried a couple of years ago and totally botched. And I come back with a different confidence, not necessarily any more technical skill, just more muscle memory and the ability to kind of understand contrast and dark and light and layering. Layering is a huge thing, realizing that you can't just always get the painting you want in one layer. So I am just drawing in the stems of the flowers here so that I have some stems in the background. I'm using the sap hue green and the green gold and the chartreuse with a little bit of white to have some of that light hitting the field. I can tell you that I was not loving what my brushes were doing, and I probably would have used a fluid acrylic instead of using the slow dry acrylic. In the future, I would do that because there wasn't as much of a spread as I wanted to have, or I could have added a medium maybe or some water. Since I'm not too worried about blending these lines at this point, it would have been fine to use a paint that dried quicker but spread easier. So I start to get tired at this point in the painting. I'm used to working on paintings over the course of several days, weeks, months, and I'm trying to work more on painting in one sitting. And that's proving to be tiresome because by the end of the painting, I'm finding myself just rushing through a little bit more and making a few more errors. So it's okay if that also happens to you. And with the slow dry paint, you want to get, or the slow dry acrylic, you do want to try to get most of your blending done before you walk away for the day. But you can go back in and rework the piece later if you need to. It's harder to blend once it started to dry. But if you're just going to be doing solid lines like these, then that's okay. So I am adding in just a lot of texture and details, like there is foliage and flowers in, or flower petals in the background. And I could have been looser with this, I think. I think that I was trying too hard to create some image in my mind. And so I start to get a little looser as time goes on, but I think I spent too much time on this part. I don't think I needed to spend so much time. I think I probably could have just drawn some suggestive flowers, made my suggestive flowers, and then maybe made a couple of lines indicating that there were some stems there, but I focused too much on these stems. So I'm going to just kind of speed through these next couple of parts so that you're not totally bored watching me do this, but you can spend as much time as you want, and it really doesn't make much of a difference in terms of what that underlayer looks like, other than that you want to just make sure there's some contrast and some differentiation in the dark and the light. So now I'm going in with some phthalo blue, a little bit of the sap hue green and white, and I'm mixing that together to create this nice little blue-green color to start adding in some of the flower details. So this is where being an artist that doesn't have, or a newbie that doesn't have technical skills comes into use, because you don't have to know how to paint flowers here. You just have to know how to apply paint to the canvas in different sizes and shapes, and so I'm just creating the suggestion of flowers here. I am not spending time to paint out the whole flower. I am just looking at the sizes and the shapes of the blobs that I'm seeing in this flower field in my reference. And I'm using those colors and those shapes and those sizes to create those similar shapes and sizes on my palette. And the more that you add and the more that you fill in the flowers, and the more that you differentiate between the sizes of the flowers, right? So the flowers that are further away from you are going to look smaller, and the flowers that are closer to you are going to look larger. So using that, and then knowing also that the flowers that are getting hit by light are going to be lighter, and the flowers that are more in the shade are going to be darker. But overall, you don't have to know how to paint a flower technically to create a field of flowers. I'm going in and I'm shading underneath some of these flowers because there is the look of paths between the flowers in this field reference photo. So I'm lightening up kind of one specific area. It's kind of thinner towards the tree line, and then I'm kind of making it wider towards the closer part of the canvas. And I'm adding some dark edges along that more lit area of flowers to create the illusion of a path. I probably should have mentioned this earlier, but if you are enjoying this class, if you want to follow along, please subscribe, please like this video. I'm still really figuring this out. I'm still really new at this, and it's helpful if you leave any tips or suggestions for my channel or my classes in the comments. But I'm really enjoying recording and creating this longer form content and talking to you along the way. I'm hoping that at this point you're realizing that this medium, the slow dry acrylic, is a lot of working and reworking and guessing and shaping. It's almost like sculpting the paint on the canvas. And if whatever you painted today doesn't look like what you wanted or it doesn't look like mine, learn from it and grow from it and keep going. Like I said, I never stop anymore. I don't just throw a painting away anymore. I always come back to it and it's always reworkable and you can always keep going. This isn't like watercolor where your mistakes are really, really hard to fix. There's a lot of mistakes that you're going to see, that you're going to know about, that no one else is going to see or know about. And I could have made this YouTube where I edited out all of the extra strokes I made, all of the errors I made, and made it seem like I just painted this seamless painting. And that's not what I want this channel to be. I want you to be coming along on my self-taught artist journey with me as someone who's been teaching myself for the last 8 years, but who also still has another lifetime to go in terms of what I have to learn. And so why not learn with a community? And so, looking at your piece, I want you to ask yourself what you would change, what you would have done differently about the process. And I want you to notice how you critique yourself and how you critique your process. Are you shaming yourself? Are you judging yourself? Or are you observing? And so you can be a mindful, non judgmental observer of the outcome. There are some schools of thought in the art world that still shame artists, that still degrade and demean artists and their talents and their abilities. But that's not what we're doing here. We're not going to shame ourselves into being a better artist. We are going to love ourselves into being a better artist. And loving ourselves involves consistency and showing up and continuing to practice, continuing to do small things as consistently as you can to improve your creative practice. So maybe you spend some time doing some sky studies. Maybe you spend some time doing some flower studies. Maybe you just spend some time creating it all. Maybe you're just watching this and you don't even own any art supplies. Go out, buy the art supplies, create the art, scribble on a piece of paper if it gets you to create something. This is not a channel for elitist artists. This is not a channel for artists who feel like there is a particular way and a particular method for art making. This is for the eclectic artist or the eclectic wannabe artist who doesn't want to live within the confines of a whole bunch of rules. And I think that's why, if I could go back in time, I would not go back to art school. I would not go to art school. I think I'd still choose mental health as my path, or I know I would still choose mental health as my path, because I genuinely think that the way that I found art and the way that art found me was the way it was supposed to happen. And the self-taught journey has built so much more confidence in me than I think a traditional art degree would have ever built in me. I think that a traditional art degree probably would have broken me down and maybe forced me out of art making for mental health. So at this point, I am pretty much done and satisfied with the composition and outcome of this painting. There's only one thing that is missing if I'm trying to create a night sky feel. And that is some stars. So I'm going to take a toothbrush, some white fluid paint, some water, and put it on a palette, dip my paintbrush in it, and I am going to use my thumb to splatter stars. I'm going to start from far away so that you have some really small, tiny stars, and then I'm going to go a bit closer to the panel so that you have some bigger stars. The real trick here is to have some diluted fluid paint, not using regular acrylic paint. You really need it to be watery. Not so watery that it's translucent, but enough that it's going to splatter. And so it's good to practice on a test panel before going in and doing this, because there's no going back once you do it. I took a palette and just covered up the bottom part of my painting so that the stars didn't make their way into the lighter parts of the piece. And I focused a little bit closer on the lighter areas in the sky where the stars might appear more concentrated. As my final touch, I add a couple of detail stars and shooting stars, and my painting is complete. So let's talk, if you feel like it, in the comments. Let's talk about the process. Let's talk about my teaching methods. Please be kind. I'm not here to be critiqued, and I'm here to build a community. And I'm so proud of you for being here, and I want to see what you made, so tag me on socials.